Kanye West's return to Twitter showcased support for President Trump, and that sparked a lot of criticism of Kanye. The rapper tweeted, quote, "You don't have to agree with Trump, but the mob can't make me not love him." He also tweeted a photo wearing a Make America Great Again hat. Chance the rapper seemed to come to Kanye's defense, tweeting, quote, "Black people don't have to be Democrats." He was criticized for that as well and later clarified the comment, saying he doesn't agree with Kanye and does not support the president. But all this has ignited a big debate about politics and race. And I'm very glad to have Jamelle Bouie, chief political correspondent at Slate, with us to discuss this all. Jamelle, in these tweets, Kanye said he emphasized that he loves everyone. He doesn't agree with anyone. He said we all have the right to independent thought. I mean, if this is an endorsement, it's a somewhat tepid, oblique one. So why has this created such a storm?
I think because Kanye West is Kanye West and has been outspoken and sort of bombastic in his own way for so long. And he's speaking about Donald Trump, who's a very divisive president, who the two actually share this personality characteristic of being very much concerned with their images and very much concerned with sort of their appearances and how they're perceived. And you take all of that and you're just going to have a news event. And it certainly helps the relevance that this is sparking or perhaps reigniting a conversation about conservatism within the African-American community.
So let's have that conversation a little bit. You wrote on Twitter, plenty of Black Americans are conservative, and you mentioned your family, but their conservatism is rooted in the experience of racism. Explain what you mean by that.
So the operative kind of social reality for Black Americans since emancipation has been racism, the experience of racism, the experience of racial oppression, racial inequality. Add whatever now you want to add after racial. That has been key to how Black Americans and central to how Black Americans have experienced this country. So it sort of stands to reason that those Black Americans who have a more conservative viewpoint, who are more concerned with preserving traditions, with not sort of changing social norms or mores that rapidly, the extent to which that is true will also be shaped by their experience of racism. And so, for example, right, among conservative-leaning African Americans or African Americans who express conservative views on things like religion and sexual morality and so on and so forth, you'll find greater support for government investment in their communities. You'll find greater support for sort of the use of government in the economy, positions that we don't necessarily associate with conservatism in the United States, but that do reflect sort of the position of Black Americans and the position of Black conservatism, which is both sort of a traditionalist ethos, but also a recognition that their communities need to be built up and assisted in whatever way possible.
And there's this perception among many that more than the average Republican, President Trump is especially hostile to those concerns. And yet he did roughly as well, or in some cases even a little better than other modern Republican candidates. How should we understand that support?
So two things. The first is that there has always been a cohort of Black Americans who support sort of, you should think of it as the conservative party in American politics. So right now that is the Republican Party, but during the 1920s, for example, when the Republican Party was still the party of sort of civil rights liberalism, or to the extent that it existed civil rights liberalism, there were some Black Americans who supported Democrats. But you'll notice that from the 1870s to the 1930s to the present, Black Americans tend to overwhelmingly support one party with a small minority supporting the other. And it has everything to do with kind of a collective judgment about which party, if not is going to be most helpful in terms of alleviating racism, is at least not an outright obstacle to doing so. So that's the first point. The second
can I just jump in on that? I don't want to prevent you from making the second point, but I feel like this is a window to now mention the Chance the Rapper tweet where he said Black people don't have to be Democrats, and he faced a lot of pushback on that.
He did face a lot of pushback. I'm not sure. I mean, one of the things that it's worth disentangling here, and I guess I alluded to it, is that there is a difference between 90%, 90+% of African Americans supporting Democratic candidates generally, and Black Americans all being Democrats, right? All being party members, all being sort of identified with Democratic Party liberalism. What's happening, what that reflects, is that Black Americans have sort of made a collective decision, if you want to think about it that way, a collective analysis that of the two parties, right now, the Democratic Party is less of an obstacle to trying to alleviate the conditions of racism. And so from conservatives to liberals to people not to independents within the Black community, sort of they've hitched their wagon to this party for that reason, because they perceive the Republican Party as being unhelpful. But let's say the Republican Party, the perception that the Republican Party was helpful in that regard. You would see more of a partisan split then, because this issue, racism, would kind of just be taken off the table because both parties may be on par with each other. And that gets to what was my second point, right, which is that Donald Trump, I think, got around 13% of African Americans in the 2016 election, looking at the exit polls at least. And that slice of voters both reflects kind of the historic number of Black voters who vote for Republican candidates since the 1960s, and you could think of it as voters who maybe aren't prioritizing kind of the presence and impact and effect of racism as much in how they're choosing their candidates. And so I think if there's anything I want people to take away is that to understand Black politics in this country, the first thing you have to understand is that how the party system and how the parties deal with racism is kind of the preeminent question. And it's only after resolving that question that Black voters begin to make decisions about how they're going to vote and how they're going to participate. And that may mean that for some people, not participating at all.
Okay. Jamel Bowie, thanks so much for your thoughts.
Thank you.